Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about, of course, we've seen different statements come from the leadership of the PTI, and as far as their stance on issues like we've seen within the National Assembly, of course, from resolutions on Palestine to also protests happening abroad and their disassociation from those protests, which seems to indicate that perhaps there is a difference of opinion within the PTI also. We'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking, of course, we're looking at Senate elections, the nominations having been done with. Of course, today was the last day to file papers. We'll be talking about the overall makeup of what we can expect as far as the Senate is concerned, the upper house is concerned, and overall the effects of the kind of interaction, the kind of liaison, the kind of dialogue, if any, we can expect between the opposition and the government henceforth. Now that, of course, the business of governance has, to a large degree, been concluded. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me today Daniel Sheikh, who's a senior analyst. Thank you for being with us today. Usman Chohan, who's a senior economist. Thank you for joining us. We will also have Abid Solehri, who's an executive director with the STPI. Thank you for being with us. Before I go on to the rifts within PTI leadership, the different statements that are coming, openly refuting each other, I want to talk a little bit about the economy also, because of course it's a difficult time for Pakistan. There are of course the government is trying to get Pakistan back, move towards stability, and of course we are looking at all efforts underway in that direction. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Usman sir, with regard to the economy, one of the foremost considerations as far as the government at this time is trying to stabilize and of course lower inflation. Also, of course, IMF and our review that's pending and our preliminary talks with regard to that. Where do you think we're at this time?
I think we're in a much better position than we have been in the last 2 years. And I say that because the IMF is here in town doing a review, and there has been this, you can say, premature jubilation on the Pakistan side, but it is warranted. So perhaps we shouldn't issue any statement saying that things are good, but we should know that the hard work has been done by the caretaker government. In particular, credit goes to them. And right now, in terms of meeting the targets, because it's a complex program with many moving parts, there's a constant to and fro of suggestions. Some suggestions are more politically palatable than others. But the main question now is, how far is this government going to be able to go with the program that the IMF would like us to see in terms of fiscal stability? And I believe in that regard that there's a lot of positive signs. I believe that the global environment is also becoming favorable towards developing countries as a whole, and that includes Pakistan in terms of global energy prices, global inflation, and you should expect recessionary forces to take place in the global economy, which should ease things up. We saw a statement, Usman Sahab, that we're probably looking at perhaps a more comprehensive agreement with the IMF this time with regard to after the review. Do you think it's going to be a possibility for Pakistan? That seems to be the target. That is correct. This standby agreement was just an interim thing, and our target now, it was even suggested in the caretaker time that we should aim for a larger program, which should be complemented by other sources of financing, including climate-related financing and other forms, to try to generate a modicum of reserves that can be deployed towards essential things. And at the same time, reforms are taken across government and across the private sector so that we can come to a stability, because it isn't just about having more money, but you also have to have more sustainability of that money. So you are correct to say that we are aiming for something more long-term. That will have its own stipulations, and so we want to be able to bargain from the strongest position possible. And in order to do that, we have to set the bar that we are committed to things. Commitment is the most important thing.
Do you think that the PTI is acknowledging, or they are now, becoming more cognizant of the reality that if they are part of the machinery, if they are part of the parliament, then they have to conduct themselves in that manner? Or do you think there's also a difference of opinion within the leadership of PTI? Because we are looking at varying statements coming from Barrister Gohar, we are looking at different statements coming from Marwat Saab also, and those, of course, the Sunni Ittihad Council controversy also we recently saw. So it seems to be, what does it look like? Do you think it's just a difference of opinion, or do you think it's a conscious change towards moving towards, becoming a part of the system even as an opposition?
I think you've asked a tremendous question, because any political party will have a heterogeneity of opinions within it. That's part of parliamentary systems. But oftentimes when certain people within a party speak, it represents the party line, so to speak, or the dominant view within that party. In the case of this party, it's not clear who is the second voice or the third voice, and therefore when you get conflicting messaging, you may appease some people with some messages and displease others with a contradictory or contravening message, but it's not clear what the stance would be, and there are trade-offs. There are trade-offs regarding whether you want to swim with the tide or if you wish to swim against the tide, because Pakistan itself is a complex country with many different types of people and many different views, and to speak with one voice is difficult inherently.
But do you think swimming against the tide, as far as the PTI itself is concerned, they feel that it has worked for them to a limited extent and now they may have to do a rethink?
It's difficult to say at this juncture, because even though, as you have contended correctly, things are beginning to stabilize, and it is a good sign. That's also true for the economy, not just for politics. But the dust still needs to settle, I believe. And in a country that is so young in terms of its demographics, you automatically have this energy and this frivolity that comes with youth. And therefore, it isn't clear yet what is the temperament of all political parties sitting in parliament, in my judgment.
Usman Sahab, there is, we're also looking at the Senate election. Of course, today was the last day to file the nomination papers. What kind of a makeup do you expect now?
It's not so important in my judgment what the makeup is per se in terms of the economy, because that's my expertise, so I'll only speak to that. What is important is that both houses in parliament come to a common view about what is important in terms of adhering to the IMF stipulations, and argue from a position of greater strength that a program needs to be undertaken that does put us on a sustainable path, so that the sort of difficulties we've faced in the last 2 years don't repeat. I'm not so picky or don't have a particular view on who should be in it or why, particularly because of the role of the Senate in terms of lawmaking and oversight and all that. So my larger concern is that they
But Usman
solve it.
actually the challenge that invariably comes is between development and stability. Of course, we want there to be stability, but then we also want there to be development. Do you think that, for us to be able to manage that has become difficult in the recent past?
This is a profound question. It's much deeper than anybody might immediately realize. That's because we have to withstand crisis, and at the same time we have to think of the larger target, which is growth. Our population grows at about 3% per year. That means you're adding 60 lakh people every year, non-stop. So when you have a 0% GDP growth and your population grew at 3%, your per capita income is falling by 3% per year. So the graph starts to look like this and decline. And in order for that, you must have at least 7% growth to achieve per capita growth of 4%. This is why growth is the ultimate target. Now, that's where the IMF is telling us that the foundations have to be more robust, particularly in terms of, let's say, how we manage our expenses, how we have a federal-provincial relationship, how we raise revenue. All of these factors point towards, at the moment, not a growth, but at best a defensive position, at best a defensive stance. And this is a deep concern that I think we all share, speaking to your important question.
Usman, as far as CPEC is concerned, of course, that's a focus. But in terms of, as far as the Chinese are concerned, our relationship, of course, the PMLN leadership also has a unique relationship with the Chinese. And of course, they would want to build on that, and they would want there to be a speedier CPEC initiatives, the agreements within CPEC to be executed flawlessly. there are concerns as far as security is concerned and overall the position there. Do you think it's better than what it was, even a year or so ago?
Yeah, that is certainly true, and that is also a reflection of the global economy as it stood. But I have lived in China, used to speak very good Chinese. I understand their psyche, and I've never seen them to be a short-term people. They're very long-term oriented, and they're not partisan in terms of who they want to be in Pakistan. They want to work with Pakistan because their conceptualization is of co-prosperity, that we build a new world together. There should not be any more colonialism. There should not be any more exploitation. The shared future and mutual interest put together. So that is a very nice way to push development forward. And they're not particularly partisan on who would, because why would they? What they care about is that the full dimensions of CPEC are realized for Pakistan's benefit as well as for China's. The full dimensions have not been realized. An initial infrastructure push in the mid-2010s took place, which was very good. And then, as has been correctly mentioned by my colleague and by you, there was a forestalling. And now to re-energize that while keeping in mind the stage 2 and the stage 3 of CPEC is very, very important, but those require different levels of thought because it is fundamentally easy to build roads. It's an engineering question. But stage 2 and stage 3 have more societal elements. They have higher order thinking requirements. So Pakistan as a whole, it's not just government's responsibility, it's the private sector in particular that has to do some heavy lifting on its side, as well as civil society getting involved to realize the complex manifestations of CPEC, which are stage 2 and 3.
The CIFC, of course, took a leading role during the last 16 months or so. Their promulgation also and, the initiatives that they've taken now, they're still very much going to be a part of how the government functions and the direction in which it chooses to go as far as economy is concerned. Do you think that those initiatives are going to be working also towards involving the private sector, like you said, into doing whatever it can, the role that it can play?
That is a complex question because, as I understand, SIFC involves greater centralization of decision making, which is an important character for driving development, that everybody is on one page. That is the strength of something like SIFC. And of course, we have redundancies because ministries are supposed to do the same stuff. So what I would like is for everybody to be on one page and in a less costly way. And for private sector to be involved in this, it has to understand and then propose a relationship vis-a-vis SIFC because private sector is decentralized by nature because every single agent in the market is trying to maximize their own interests and will lead to broader capital gains. Now, is that true when you have a centralized decision making for deals? I'm not clear on the centralization versus decentralization dynamic, and I don't know if anybody can answer that one any more lucidly than that.
Abid Sir, thank you for time. Before I go to Danial, Usman sir, what kind, with regard to the IMF, of course, you heard Abid sir be saying it's going to take a couple of months. We are looking at a program that's going to be for 3-4 years long. Of course, with the government aiming to negotiate that kind of a program, the budget, we're already looking at budget sessions. If you look at the Punjab Assembly, and of course, it's going to come as far as the NA is concerned also. Do you think it's going to, what kind of a budget do you think we can expect?
Well,
is it going to be very, is it going to depend largely on this agreement or the kind of agreement that we reach with the IMF? Are we going to be looking at more increases? What kind of a budget?
Yes, it's something that we should be thinking hard about the June-July season because you are correctly alluding to the fact that greater pressures may be put to align with IMF targets, raising the rates and so on. At the same time, the political players will want to give some freebies or something to the public because
we're already looking at prices as far as fuel is concerned in some areas to be retained, and they don't want to increase that.
Yes, that's correct. So again, they may wish to give some relief in some corners, but their room to maneuver is very limited now because their overarching pressure now is from the IMF. And so how much can they do in this budget to ease the burden of the public? It is difficult. I think you're making an important point. And I wouldn't, in budgeting, you never look at just one season. You try to look for a 5-year or 10-year trajectory. And that's where I think the IMF program plays the key role because it buttresses the core in terms of the foreign exchange reserve. So in this budget, as well as subsequent ones, you will see a limited room to maneuver. Now that requires creativity. And a particular area where I think the questions will start to rise is the relationship between the federating units and the center, because the center is starting to become very hollow by assuming so much burden on behalf of the provinces, and the provinces really need to start taking responsibility and show greater transparency and accountability on the fiscal side so that the overall fiscal architecture remains coherent. And I think this is the unfinished business of an 18th Amendment that hasn't been done. Now, I understand that the Constitution limits how much can be done, but in terms of transfers of liabilities to the province, there is a lot of things that can be done.
Of course. The government is cognizant of the reality that it has to deliver. It is also cognizant of the reality that there is, unfortunately, an economic situation that really needs to be bettered. Therefore, with that in mind, with those realities in mind, it has its work cut out for it, but there's also a resolve to do it and make it as far as the government is concerned. Of course, we have to keep our expectations realistic, but we will be looking at a more stable, a more economic friendly Pakistan. Let's hope that we can move towards that. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.